This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 205 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Today, I'm sharing an interview I did with Amy Baugh, a member of Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. Amy Baugh is an experienced SLP, a lifelong learner, and truly enjoys listening to podcasts, joining SLP groups on social media, and collaborating with her besties about all things speech, language, and being a business owner. She is the proud mother of 2 college-aged daughters and enjoys learning and practicing functional health, working out, reading, and cooking, and she is the owner of Elation Speech and Language Services. When Amy took a position at a high school with a large caseload, she knew she needed a solid strategy for keeping intervention intensive, but also ensuring teachers and paraprofessionals had the information they needed to support students in class. That is around the time that she decided to join Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. When many clinicians come to me for support, they're often focused on the micro, such as planning sessions. And that's why one of the first things I give people in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is a framework that clinicians can use for language therapy and direct intervention. However, once clinicians have their heads above water and they have the mental bandwidth to focus on more macro level things, they realize what else is possible when it comes to the impact they can make, as well as career opportunities. In Amy's case, it meant being able to focus on training teachers and paraprofessionals to implement language intervention in the classroom, as well as in a number of different contexts. And it also enabled her to have a solid framework to use when she started a private practice. In this conversation, we discuss the power of consultation and coaching when you have a large caseload, the house strategy for initiating collaborations with teachers and adjacent disciplines. This is a strategy that Amy came up with herself that she shares in our conversation as we're talking about getting buy-in from teachers. We also talk about why focusing on your systems, like your schedule, your habits, and your frameworks, can actually help you get buy-in from teachers and administration. And we also touch on the importance of syntax, vocabulary, and word study at the secondary level, even though we know this is really important at the early levels as well. As I mentioned before, Amy is a member of Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that gives SLPs and other service providers a system for language therapy. To learn more about that program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. So in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, I give SLPs and other providers who are supporting language a framework that helps you build vocabulary using things like morphology, phonology, orthography, semantics, and syntax, and really helps you systematize it so that you are able to keep your therapy structured and rigorous while at the same time making it individualized based on students' needs. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Now, please enjoy this conversation with Amy Baugh. Today, I am joined by Amy Baugh, an SLP from Nashville. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Great to be here today.
Yeah, so I know we're really excited to just share all about some of the things that you've been working on, but maybe before we start, can you just share a little bit about yourself, kind of your backstory leading up to what you're doing now?
Sure, it's a long backstory. So
Yeah, well, we've got
I
some time.
graduated. Yeah, I graduated from UT Knoxville in 1997 with my master's in speech pathology. Went straight into the school system, Wilson County Schools, which is east of Nashville, and stayed in the school system for 5 years until I had my first child. Worked part-time for the schools with assistive technology and um, some homebound, and then went to the clinic setting, stayed in the clinic setting until COVID. So COVID happened. I was in the clinic setting, and I was a single parent at the time and needed income. So I thought, where's my job security? I'm going back to the school system.
Mhm.
Went back to the schools, Williamson County Schools, which is south of Nashville, and landed at Franklin High School. And that's how I found your program because my caseload was
Okay.
large and I needed to somehow give as many people as I could a program that was effective. So that's how I found you.
I'm just
That's
curious how big your caseload was because I know it's so different across different states with caps. Like, what was your high school caseload?
Well, and for high school with the schedule, it was approaching 80,
Okay.
which for a high school, there were 7 periods in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Franklin High population is close to 1,800
Mm-hmm.
students, so not as large as some high schools. That was my only school. That was Williamson County Schools was in the process at the time of just getting one therapist per school, one SLP per school. So that was nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did have 6 transition classes, meaning kids that were either full inclusion
Mm-hmm.
or going out to some classes. That took a lot of time. And then I had my kids that were just students that were in the general ed population that needed support. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a wide variety of students.
Yeah. That's a
Hmm.
big, and I'm just thinking about when I was at the high school and the district that I worked in, it was a smaller district, and I'm trying to think about how big the school was, but it was maybe like a half day. It wasn't a full caseload, but I know some people who have a hard time even justifying services at the high
Hmm.
school. So, I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
obviously it's unfortunate that you had a really big caseload, but at least there was a caseload, at least it was supported. So,
Right. And
yeah.
that's well, Williamson County Schools in Tennessee is one of the top school districts, or maybe the top school district. And we have very educated families in
Hmm.
that area, so they were educated about services
Hmm.
and pushed for that. And I
That's good.
am a proponent for that.
Yeah.
I know depending on the area, and I was even speaking yesterday with a team in an adult facility. Their incoming students is what they call their new people that are coming in.
Hmm.
Just talking about how even just 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, the caseload seemed to cap at the high school level because
Yeah.
there was a mindset of, oh, they
You're
can't
done
learn
with speech.
anymore. Right, right.
Yeah.
We're done with
Mhm.
language. And I from an SLP standpoint, kind of it's a double-edged sword. I get it
Yeah.
because you were like, oh my gosh, that's one less person on my caseload, which is,
Right.
but at the same time, you know that they need it.
Hmm.
And so then I think maybe that's where consultation was born.
Yeah, I know that people do consultation, but I think
Uh-huh.
that a lot of don't like I think consultation is it's really important and we should always be doing consultation on even when we have direct services, but at the same time, it shouldn't be like, well, it's almost a fallback. A
Hmm.
consultation is great when that's the appropriate thing to be doing.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
not just, oh, well, we don't have time to see him in our schedule, which not faulting the SLPs. I know you don't always have support from the administration or the teachers
Hmm.
to be able to pull
Hmm.
kids out. I mean, that was
Hmm.
a challenge for me.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and so that's where again I use consultation to my benefit because and how I found the Essential Five because
mhm,
I needed to share this information with teachers and the paraprofessionals that were there because Franklin High has a large population of students with an IEP.
mhm,
There are a lot of teachers assistants or paraprofessionals, and they were wonderful to work with and wanted
Yeah.
to know. So I just kind of gradually introduced and said, hey, by the way, here's how you can help with vocabulary, or here's how you can help the student with um, written expression, or, so
Yeah.
that's how I found it. It worked well. It worked really well.
And I would love to hear how, especially with paraprofessionals, because I think they're definitely an untapped resource in many situations where we could definitely be, we want to train the teachers, but we can train the paraprofessionals. That can be really useful. And I worked with some great paras when I was in the schools as well. And it's a way that you can train somebody to do something that, and they go with the student outside of your therapy room, and so
Yes.
there's another set of eyes for you. So
Yes.
what
Yes.
what kinds of things were you, wait, like, case you mentioned that, so you came across language therapy advanced foundations and some of the frameworks that I teach in my program when you were in the high school, but like what kind of cases did you have, and how did it look like from an application standpoint when you were first learning? I'd
Mhm.
love to hear some examples and just some things that were coming up for you.
Well, and so what I did was I started with the semantic analysis. So I'm I'm kind of a checklist type of
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
So I appreciate the modules and how they're set up. And then in my mind at first, I was like, oh gosh, I can only listen to module 3,
Right. Yeah.
because
You can
that's
only.
and just kind of go down the checklist. So but then as I got to know the program and how they are all woven together, I was able to pick out the pieces
Hmm.
according to my
Yeah.
student and what they needed. But
Hmm.
where I started was with the semantic analysis because, and actually to kind of, I've also used it in elementary school too, not just
Hmm.
the high school level.
Right.
Um, being just having that framework of how to uh, use a noun, a verb, an adjective, and then the syntax definition. So I put those together. So every time I use the framework for a noun, then right after that, we wrote a sentence about our
Hmm.
target word. And so I kind of use those in
Yeah.
combo, and I would choose a word that was particular to their subject at the time. And it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be English language arts. It could be science. It can
Right.
be because there are so many terms and definitions
Hmm.
that have words embedded into those definitions that the student doesn't know. So
Yeah.
creating that, which in turn will help reading comprehension because they know the definition because they know the terms inside of the definition. So that's how I went about doing that. So I started with semantic analysis and went straight into the syntax, definition syntax, yeah, or the sentence form. Hmm.
Yeah. And I love how, so I think what gets challenging for people, especially at high school, is, and you're supposed to always do this, but just aligning with the curriculum. And I think sometimes people will ask, well, if I'm not if I'm not doing exactly what the teacher's doing in the classroom, am I aligned with the curriculum? Well, if you are doing something that is going to help students think about language differently and access the curriculum, then that's aligned. And
Yes.
especially if you have the option, you have some tools like, again, with semantic feature analysis and definition syntax are just ways to help students to self-question and to describe words and look for information when they're out in their classroom reading a paragraph, and just be more aware of some of
Hmm.
those,
Hmm.
with that storage and retrieval and questions they can be asking themselves. And I think that if we can teach students that, but then also you have the option of figuring out, all right, what words are coming up in their curriculum, and that's a way you can make it aligned as well. And I think
Hmm.
sometimes people get caught with like, I have to get through this word list, which of course the word list is relevant, but you don't have to get through the word list. That's not the point. It's to
Right.
help
That's
students to think about language differently.
That's what I was going to say too. The self-questioning is so huge. And it's once they can get that, you don't
Mhm.
even need the visual for the
Yes.
semantic
Hmm.
analysis. They have that in their head and they're going to automatically, and that's something that the paras can have. So what I like to do, or what I did, I'm not in the schools anymore, but I would just copy that off and put it in like a either laminate it or put it in a binder of some sort so that the parent could have it with them all the time. Because a
Hmm.
lot of times that just to have something to refer to. I'm a big like handout. I like tangible.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
It's just to have, and then even then they would not need it after a while because they had that framework in their mind and can go through. And the students, when they're going through those definitions in their curriculum, whatever subject it may be, like you said, that awareness happens and they are aware, oh, I don't know this word. I can't remember this definition. I'm having a hard time memorizing it because there's some words in here I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
breaking it down. That's
Hmm.
was helpful.
Well, and I think people when we work on vocabulary, it's everybody knows that you should work on vocabulary, but it's the
Mhm.
how. We all know we're
Mhm.
not supposed to just be rote memorizing definitions, but what else? Like, what do you do instead? And
Yes.
I think that's challenging for people. And so I love what you said about giving something tangible, like you're giving some kind of a visual cue that eventually people didn't need anymore because it was in their head. And I think people take for granted what we do in our head. And that's why you
Oh,
go to memorization because you think, oh, well, these other kids memorize it. I'm like, no, they just did it in their head more efficiently. And
mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm. And it just takes time. It does. I mean,
mhm,
it takes time for buy-in,
mhm.
especially
Yeah.
if, I mean, I was given a caseload of, when you're new in a school, you've got to get to know your team, you've got to get to know the students and the administration.
Hmm.
It's a whole process. So
Right.
the buy-in was big, and it wasn't a fast thing. It took, by the end of the school year, everyone knew, oh, this is really going to work. And then by the next
Yeah.
year, it was great. And I was at the high school for only 3 years, and then that's when I started my practice. But once I started my practice, I was also in an elementary school and went into the a third grade classroom and just as an interim position, helping out a startup therapy company.
Hmm.
And it was fabulous. And that was in the third grade classroom. And they call in the pair every I would have the class for an hour twice a week. And all of my students with an IEP were in the classroom. And the pairs that were in the classroom took data. So my progress monitoring was fabulous. And it gave data for the teacher because she was like, oh, I have such a hard time sometimes
Hmm.
getting written
Yeah.
word from my students that
Hmm.
have IEPs, with all kinds of things going on. So it can be used in so many different ways.
Yeah. Well, and I would love to hear about because I think a lot of people when you're in the weeds, like you're an SLP, you're in the schools, you've got a caseload of 80 or 100 or whatever it is. Even if you have a caseload that's less than that, it can still be overwhelming depending
Hmm.
on who's on your caseload. And a
Hmm.
lot of people they'll come to me and be like, I just want like the curriculum or the worksheets just because you're putting out fires. You're not thinking long
Yes.
term,
Yeah.
but just some of the things that you're sharing that once you get to that point that you feel like you've got your head above water with what am I doing with my students in therapy? Like how that can potentially free up bandwidth to think about other things like how do I train a paraprofessional? How do I get the teachers to buy into doing this in their classroom? Or how do what if I want to start a private practice? I mean, I think one of the challenges that people have with doing all of those things I mentioned, training other people and sharing and going into a classroom and then you're kind of on the spot, which is not something we're used to, or charging people for our services in private
Hmm.
practice, like you've got to be confident in your clinical skills. So
Hmm.
I would love to hear about how that was for you, because like you said, you kind of you've used the framework in a number of different contexts,
Hmm.
even though a
Hmm.
lot of people sometimes come to me and they're in the schools. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking now, I've used the framework in four different contexts at this
Okay.
point, approaching four.
Yeah.
So yes, I just using that framework, and well, I'll have to tell you about my house strategy.
Okay. Oh,
This,
yes. We wanted to talk about this.
I
We
think this is a good
did.
point for the
It
house
is.
strategy.
Let's do it.
So my house strategy, and I started this when I started in the schools, well, actually in the high school, because it's hard going into a high school classroom. I mean,
Oh, I
it's so
know. Oh,
different than going into,
terrifying.
yeah, well, instead of going into a an elementary classroom, because let's say each grade level has their schedule, right?
Mhm.
And so you kind of know what their schedule is. But high school, it's they're all over the place every single period of the
Yeah.
day.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when I was at the high school, my house strategy was I thought, okay, because just walking into a classroom at the beginning of class when everyone's trying to get seated or when
Yeah.
they're turning in work or when the teacher's getting ready to lecture, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
However, my transition classes where it was my full inclusion students, I could walk into that classroom. So some of them. Um, so my house strategy is, first of all, every teacher, they take a pride in their classrooms.
Yeah.
They've spent time
Hmm.
with the organization of their class and how they want their class to look and where they want their students to be positioned.
Hmm.
Um, so I treat that as their home.
Yeah.
That is their home. That's their house. A lot of teachers, I promise you, probably spend more time in their classroom during the school year than they do in their own homes during the week.
I would guess that's true in
It's a
some
home away from
cases.
home. So
Hmm.
that's their home. That's their
Hmm.
house. So some people are okay with you just stopping by their house. Come on by anytime. That's true. Just come say hi. Some people want a little notice. Hey, can I come by in a couple of hours? I've got something I need you to sign, or I've got something I need to run by you. Some people want full on notice.
Yeah.
Please
Yeah.
email
Yeah.
me. I, I have a
Hmm.
busy day. I can't get to you today. Or you email and you may not hear from them until the next day or
Or
a couple
some
of
don't
days.
want you in there. I
Or
mean,
some don't at
yeah.
all. Some just, that is true. So that's
Hmm.
my house strategy. I just treat it as that's their home.
Hmm.
How would you walk into someone's home? And just start giving them information that maybe they're don't have the headspace to take on in the moment. So
Yeah.
um, that's my house strategy. So that's how I kind of learned to use the program in all those different ways, like at the high school level
Hmm.
and the elementary level with my private clients and with hopefully a soon to be adult facility that I'm speaking with
Yeah.
right now. So um, that's how I use that kind of across all those different ways and gaining that trust from the teachers and just following through and checking in, getting to know the paras. Then once we got that scheduled, I was in the classroom. I wanted everyone to stay. I mean, some would consider that maybe their break, but I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, I need you in here.
Oh, the
So
teachers?
the teachers,
Yeah, they do. Like, you do have to talk about that beforehand because,
yes,
I mean, why wouldn't you take the opportunity to get a break? Yeah, I mean,
right.
they
I
don't get
mean,
enough planned time. So,
no, they
but
don't,
yeah,
and or maybe just even just a bathroom break,
yeah, I mean, I
But
could understand a little bathroom
yeah,
break, but yeah, I had a teacher who that I worked with who I would go in, and it was actually in the morning for one of my autistic students, and she would be kind of doing stuff, but she mentioned later, she's like, "Oh, I learned so much from, watching you work with him." And so she was still getting some stuff done, but there was nobody else in the classroom at the time because it was first thing in the morning, so she could
right.
kind of pay attention. So
Yeah,
it's an
yeah, and
opportunity to model and show them what we do.
yes, and I love that. That's one thing as I've grown in my career, I love teaching other people because I feel like, and just coaching, that coaching training aspect, I feel
Hmm.
like even though, yes, we need to work with our students
Hmm.
and a lot of
Yeah.
students are independent or group or whatever, but I just am a huge proponent of getting everyone involved and helping them understand how important that is.
Hmm.
And then you see tremendous growth. You see such great progress and they are believers once they see the progress.
Yeah.
Hmm
That's definitely I mean, I think sometimes you can start with those teachers who are the stop over anytime, or maybe just give me a little bit of notice, and they're willing to have you come in their classroom. That's a good place to start to, because teachers talk to each other.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, maybe you start off with the teachers who are already asking you to come in, because sometimes they do ask you to come in, or that are just, flexible about it and willing to work with you. And then that's how you get the others to buy in sometimes, because then
Mm-hmm.
they see the results.
Mm-hmm.
How did
Mm-hmm.
it look when, so I'm curious about how you trained the teachers and what kind of resources and methods you use to, like, okay, here's this framework that you're doing in therapy, and now we want to figure out how to get it embedded into the classroom. And also the paraprofessionals. I'd love to hear about, like, what's the method, how did you do that knowledge transfer?
Well, I'm very persistent.
Yes.
So, and
That's
I
always
like
important.
yeah, I'm very persistent. I like a schedule and I stick to my schedule as best as possible. I think that's kind of the underlying thing because again,
Mhm.
as SLPs in schools, we have IEP meetings. The IEP meetings will
Yeah,
absolutely wreck your therapy schedule
right.
for a week, depending on the week, or state testing or school holiday. I mean, whatever. So the absolute minimum, I would stick to my schedule. And if I had a particularly tricky situation in a classroom or maybe a student, I would work around that as best as I could so that I could be in there at the exact time and the exact day that I said I was going to be in there.
Hmm.
And then the teachers and the paras, they were more open and more susceptible, to new information and me giving them the your framework, for the
Yeah.
even just for the semantic analysis and just to start there, not
Hmm.
to throw all that at them at once, but to start small
Hmm.
and have them so I have a folder for each student with that particular framework, and then the paras could help the student or have the student write, just depending on whatever level the student was at. So that's how I introduced it, was mainly just really just sticking to my schedule
That's
and
interesting.
being there when I said that I was going to be there. Um, and then it's a trust building thing,
Yeah.
it's you build trust and then they want to hear what you have to say. And then so when you have that relationship, they're naturally going to be more open to trying things. And then they're going to be also more open to changing the goals on the IEP
Mm.
to
Yeah.
align with the Central Five because
Yeah.
that's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole other episode for sure.
Yes.
I'm going to take a quick break here to talk about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that helps SLPs create a system for language therapy by focusing on the essential components of vocabulary that help students develop a foundation to support strategic planning, to support high-level processing, and to give them those vocabulary and syntactic skills they need that are going to support literacy and life outcomes. As a clinician, especially if you are in the schools, it can be really difficult to know where to start. In fact, that's probably the biggest pain point that I hear from school SLPs is, where the heck do I start? What is my hierarchy? How can I prioritize all these possible skills when my students have so many different needs and I have so many different people telling me all these different messages about where I should be focusing? What I do in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is give you a 5 component framework that supports those language skills that are going to build the foundation that students need to support their academic skills, their vocational skills, their reading and writing skills, all those things that are going to help them be successful in school and in life beyond school. That 5 component framework focuses on vocabulary as the core umbrella area where we are supporting students. And the elements that fit under that umbrella are orthography, morphology, phonology, semantics, and syntax. So we're building a foundation for students to have that high level processing, to be able to understand sentences at the word level, at the sentence level, and to be able to formulate complex thoughts for high level strategic planning. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. And I
Yes.
always tell people, if you've got comprehension goals and things, I mean, you can still work on you can work on syntax if you have a comprehension goal, because that it's going to be working on that goal. Even,
Mhm.
yes, you probably should also have a more specific goal that indicates that you're working on syntax, but if you also have a comprehension goal, the syntax is going to support that goal. So you don't necessarily have to, panic and rewrite all of your IEPs, but you
Right.
should definitely, make a practice of updating them and be more intentional about how you write goals going
Mhm.
forward.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
interesting that a lot of people, when they want to know about therapy sessions, or maybe even what would it look like if I go into a classroom and like do an in-class therapy session or do in-class services, but where you went was the schedule. So you went more macro with that, because so that's interesting, where it's if you make the time slots for these activities, that you can figure out what to do within those time slots. And I think
Yes.
a lot of times SLPs and other clinicians are very focused on the time slots, but then if you can't put the big picture system and structure in place around your schedule, you can't even get to the point that you're talking about the details and the specific
Right.
tactical things.
Right. I guess to your point, I am a macro thinker. I mean,
Yeah,
I really am. I think, okay, here's what I want it to look like. How do I get there?
yeah,
And so that's kind of where I started. But then to get to the micro part of it
right.
is that's when you do have the buy-in, you do have everyone on board. They want to help you, they want to help the
Hmm.
students, and they see how it works. And I would give them your podcast. I mean, I give lots of as many resources as
Yeah,
possible, because when they have that buy-in, they want to learn. And then before you know it, they're even using the framework with students that aren't even on the IEP. They just see how it works.
yeah.
And they find that it's easy for them. It's something to follow, that like once you get it, you get it, So
Hmm.
I gave lots of resources. Most of the resources that you cite in your in the resources area of your program, and your podcast, and then just printing off different the framework, the semantic analysis, the syntax definition. I love passive voice because that's and to your point, actually, I was just listening to that in the module again the other day. Um, it's not just for elementary students, and that's
Oh
where
yeah.
and
That's people think,
it's
oh,
not just
it's
for
it's
elementary.
done. There's so many young adults. Like I could even see it being worked on in your if you end up working with an adult facility for with
Oh,
students who
mm-hmm,
have DLD and
mm-hmm,
other diagnoses that impact
mm-hmm,
language, if they
mm-hmm,
don't have that skill yet.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's amazing. So they absolutely will pretty much want to help you as much as possible. The paras, the teachers, if they know that you're there when you say you're going to be there. So
Mhm. That's
it was
that's so interesting. It's so simple, you know what I mean? Like just
yes.
that it's here is one thing that put the structure in place. And I actually, if people are really overwhelmed about collaboration, because a lot of times we have, so here's the language therapy framework, and it's great, and people learn how to do it in their therapy sessions, and so now they feel good about how they're doing direct therapy, but then you realize there's all this other stuff that needs to happen in order for my students to be successful. It's true for language. It's really like certainly true for executive functioning as well. And I think
Mm-hmm,
that where people get stuck is like, how do I find time to do all of this? And
mm-hmm,
so if you do start with the schedule, then you figure out where those, I don't want to say hidden, but like you can figure out how to carve out those time blocks to have a conversation with the teacher or go
mm-hmm,
into a classroom or make some materials that you can share with a para or a teacher. Because
mm-hmm,
I think that's the other thing that I'm taking away from what you're saying is that there's your time that you're doing, like you're blocking out time to go spend with the teachers and the paras, but then you also are figuring out how can I share a resource to supplement that so you don't always have to be explaining over and over. Like here's
Hmm.
a thing I can share with you that you can use again and again when I'm not there.
Yes. And that's when they use that on a
Hmm.
daily or even just a few more days extra than what you can be in the classroom or what your
Hmm.
schedule or caseload allows, then that's absolutely when you see the carryover. And then before you know it, they want to dive a little bit deeper, and then uh, start to understand those terms, the morphology and the phonology
Hmm.
aspect of it. I have the word study toolkit is great. And even when if there's downtime in the classroom, and this is something I didn't say before, in my transition classes, just that word study and being able to take apart a word and understand it from that aspect is so wonderful and is a good, and students enjoy it. It creates great conversation, especially
Yeah.
when you're in a group setting. Um, and so these were students that up to the age of 22 that I
Hmm.
did that because this was a lot of that was my 18 to 22-year-old caseload at the time too.
I think that's such a great point that you bring up that you're doing word study. So we're looking at morphology and phonology and
Mhm.
looking at skills that are going to impact decoding because so many times in high school, just like, oh, speech is done. We don't need to work on this anymore. We don't need to work on sentence structure because kids should already know these skills. Or we don't need to work on decoding because we're in high school and we're working on comprehension now. And
Mhm.
honestly, that happens so much earlier. I mean, it happens in probably late elementary. Sometimes we move on to comprehension before students are ready, but students can learn if you give them the skills. And so I think that's so important that we keep doing that at the high school for students who need it. And I think the other thing you brought up is that, when you teach students a skill that helps them to be more successful, that they are engaged. I think people worry about, oh, well, this is going to be boring because we're not playing games. Well,
Right.
like in sometimes challenging work is engaging. It's not all about making it easy and fun. I
Hmm.
mean, I think sometimes if it's too easy, then you're not engaged.
Right. And I found really, I mean, I have all the games.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously we
I
can do
mean,
that too. We're
my
not saying you'll never.
materials,
Yeah.
my garage is my material zone
Oh,
right now.
yeah.
But I found too, as I was doing this, the fewer materials I really needed
Yeah,
because
that's interesting.
which is great because especially if you're really on the move, during your day and you don't have time to go back and forth. The high school that I was in was large. I mean, I got my steps in every day for sure, but
Yeah.
but I it really created uh less material, like for me to
Yeah.
have to carry more with me into a classroom. Um, and it was nice too because the students, it created genuine conversation and it was
Mhm.
great. It really did kind of bleed over into other areas, social skills and all
Mhm.
those pragmatic areas,
Yeah.
because and they were I got buy-in from them, they wanted to know and then it would spur, oh, well, what about this word or what about this word? So it was great. As a matter of fact, one of my classes, I kept a vocabulary journal. And so, and this was actually right before I found your program. We had a vocabulary journal, so every week I was in there. And then when I found your program, we went back and uh, dissected some of that that
Some of
vocabulary.
those words. Yeah.
Yes, and it
That's
those
great.
and it wasn't from a curriculum. Those were just words that would come up in conversation.
Hmm.
And we had all different levels of students in the class. And this was in my it's called Transition 2 in Williamson
Hmm.
County. It's the 18 to 22-year-old classroom. And they were fascinated. We had one student that loved to use these gigantic vocabulary words, and the other
Yeah.
students were, or we had students that were nonverbal or non-speaking in the class. And so it's good for everyone. So I'm all encompassing. Like I told you, I'm a macro thinker. So,
Yeah.
and I think too, the more you do this, you think on your feet, like
Mm.
you think on your feet, and that's a skill that I've taught myself through the years. And oh, this is not working. How can I make it more engaging? So
Well,
that's
and I think that's the nice balance because people on one hand, sometimes I find that clinicians really want a curriculum or a hierarchy because it's
Mhm.
certainty. It
Yes,
seems like, oh, all these decisions are made for me because it's so overwhelming
it is.
amount of decisions you have to make throughout the
Hmm.
day when you're in the middle of a therapy session and you've got, humans in front of you that are reacting and responding. But I think you have to, like, you can find enough certainty in a framework,
Yes.
but and then that's your routine. So you kind of
Hmm.
minimize your cognitive load there. But then once you do that, and once you have your systems in place, so your macro, your structure, then
Hmm.
that gives you that wiggle room for creativity. And that's where I see the balance, because I know that sometimes some people love the curriculum and want you to be like, just tell me what to do. And some people are like, don't tell me
True.
what to do. And so
True.
to me,
Yeah.
it's that nice balance between being rigorous, being
Hmm.
evidence-based, but
Hmm.
also having some creativity and
Hmm.
making it engaging. And I think what's also interesting with the what you said about the vocabulary journal, and sometimes the words are conversational, that
Hmm.
you don't have to be rigid with how you pull vocabulary
Right.
into your sessions. When you have a framework, you can pull them from the language arts curriculum or the science, or students maybe are in a vocational setting and they have certain terms they need to use for their job or
Hmm.
their extracurricular. Like, you can pull from multiple sources and just
Hmm.
use the process of describing words with semantic features or defining words, because you have that framework, and then the words are just how you align it.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes that's the best way because
Yeah.
the students remember. And
Hmm.
I would have students come to me in the hall, and because they knew, and again, that was all about schedule, because they knew when I was going to be there. And they would shout out a word to me, Miss Baugh, hey, it's a extravagant day or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
So that creates carryover.
Yeah.
So it's like I was seeing great carryover with that too, because they were engaged and they got it. So, and then of course, when the teachers see that too, they're like, wow, when are you coming to my class? I mean, that's,
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. It's always great when you get invited. I know, I
yeah.
think sometimes it's a little scary. Like, I always felt comfortable in my therapy room, and then when you're
Uh,
in the room in front of the kids, it's different, you know? Like, I think
yes.
some people are comfortable with it, and you get comfortable as you do it more, but
Well, and
I
and so it is. And this is year 27 for me, so I'm comfortable.
yeah.
Comfortable. Um, but it's wonderful. I love it. And I think what I was going to tell you too, just about the collecting data and your
Oh,
evidence
yeah.
base and the progress monitoring. So my teacher's assistants, or I would have, and sometimes even some of my other students, just helping to collect that data, or like having
Hmm.
that written work as my data. And then also at times, and I know this might seem a little scary to some people, but I purposefully, this was when I was in the elementary school, helping out, I was still having to get observed, by
Yeah.
administration. So I would
Yeah.
have administration come in during that time, because then that was buy-in for them.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
huge.
So, and that seems a little scary to
It
people, because
does, but
but I'm okay with that. And
yeah.
they don't know what I'm doing. So it's,
Yeah,
but
well, and I think you could do it. Maybe that's not the first time you tried it. That's not
right.
when you
Well,
were your
no, 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 no.
administrator.
It's
But yeah, that would be.
this is after everyone's comfortable, everyone is in the
Yeah.
flow, and
Hmm.
then you have your admin come in, and then they're like, "Oh, wow!" Because the third grade classroom I was in, actually, vocabulary was one of their lowest areas in their state testing, and this
There you
was
go.
last school year, and so that when I heard that, the teacher that I was working with, I explained the Essential Five to her, and she was like, "Oh wow, this let me show you our test scores from last year." So if that's another hook, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
if you
It
can,
is a hook. I
hmm
think it is important to understand what are the stressors for teachers? What are the stressors for administrators? And I mean, with something like language,
hmm
it's not like you can draw the connections because it impacts so many things. And I
hmm
even tell teachers, like, what if you have students who maybe you think there are behavior problems because they're never following along with the class? Do they not understand the directions? So maybe that's your hook. Maybe
hmm
that's your way to get in the door with that particular teacher. Like,
hmm
what do they care about?
Yeah. And if absolutely, if there's a student that is um causing a little havoc in the classroom,
Yeah,
then how can you help? I mean, why? Why is that happening?
right.
And I'm
Yeah.
thinking the why, and then how can we help with that? And very well could be that they're just everything that they're trying to read is not making sense, or
Mhm.
the words just aren't coming together. And then how can you help that student too? Because when you're helping the student, you're definitely helping the teacher.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if it's, a student that where they're not quite sure how to, again, if there are behaviors, that's always a big one that is going
hmm
to have an impact on teachers. But I think with older students, it's it is really hard to tease out the why, especially
hmm
when you do have students that are showing behaviors if they're not engaged or they're when if you're in high school and you can't read and you can't understand the directions. I mean, what's a common thing that you're going to do? You're going to try to distract from the fact, because you're embarrassed.
Yes.
It's so I think that you can't,
hmm
unfortunately, those students get labeled as behavior problems when really it
hmm
could be a reading issue, it could be a language issue.
hmm
And
hmm
not, obviously, we want to hold students accountable, but also we want to make sure that we teach them the skills
hmm
so that we're getting to the root issue.
Absolutely. That, yes, that again could be a whole other
Oh, I
podcast.
know. Yeah, I actually did so for my reading is fundamental series back in September 2024, I
Yes.
had Dr. Shamika Stewart on, and she talked a lot about this topic of the behaviors and how it's linked, and just yeah, great episode. We'll link to that. And also had a great conversation with Dr. Carla McGregor, who
Mm,
does a lot of work with DLD, and we had a conversation about can students or can individuals understand their Miranda rights if they like listen to the language in the disciplinary handbook and and again listening to their rights. A lot
gosh,
of language there, or the driver's test. That's another one.
I listen, yes, I listened to that
Yeah.
podcast recently
Yep.
talking about, as a matter of fact, one of the teachers that I worked with, one of the inclusion teachers that I worked with also worked well, he probably works more than part-time for the driver's education
Yeah.
and where he lived. And so a lot of all of his students, and then that had to pass the permit test, he would use that vocabulary a lot of times when in his inclusion setting, so they could understand and pass the permit test or the driver's license test, that you have to take that's
Hmm.
multiple choice, because
Yeah. Yeah.
the vocab and just the sentence structure is complex.
Oh yeah.
And I love that podcast episode that you talked about that.
That was Tiffany Shahomian Ruiz, also
Yes.
an LTA student. So
Yes.
yeah, and I think that what frustrates me sometimes is that people are like think it's academic skills, but these things that are academic, yes, they can impact your ability to pursue higher education or vocational skill or
Mhm.
school if you want to do that, but also a job. If you go into the workforce, there are going to be written language demands, reading, and yes, you can get accommodations, but if you also have issues with processing and
Mhm.
have something
Mhm.
read out loud to you, well,
Mhm.
then it's going to be hard for you to listen as well.
Mhm. 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 And that's, yes, that's again what I um just pitched yesterday, as a matter of fact, with my in the adult facility that I hope to be a part of soon, with social skills and why social skills and life skills are hard for carryover because the language you're using is
Yeah,
not relatable. It
yeah,
don't understand. So how do you make that manageable for an adult?
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I worry about young adults like that that transition, those students that are going from high
That's
school to
tough.
college, and especially when I mean they're legal adults at that point, but at the same time, if there's some skills, just being able to make sure they get the right supports. So
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
high school is important. I mean, all of it is, but high school
Hmm.
is a prime opportunity.
It is.
Building those
I didn't,
skills.
I did. I've always loved working with every age. I mean, I've worked with EC through adult, early
Hmm.
intervention through to EI or EC. Um, I love high schoolers, and they're a rare breed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the high school and that early adult age. So again, just finding your program and working with them, like because you have your populations, you have your ADD, ADHD
Hmm.
students, your students on the spectrum, autism spectrum, your ED students, or so just. But your program just kind of fit the mold for everyone, and it's exactly what I needed at the right time.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to connect and that you found it and that we're able to record this episode as well so we
Yes,
can hear about all the things that you've been doing. So,
yes, thank you so much. More to come.
yes, for sure. We will have you on again, potentially with some friends. So,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
excited about that. I'm
yes.
excited what lies ahead. So, where can people go to learn more about what you do? I know you have a private practice, or where can people connect with you?
Uh-huh. So my practice is the website is www.elationspeech.com, Elation. And the name of my practice is Elation Speech and Language Services. And I got that name actually from a friend of mine. He said, Amy, everyone around you just is happy. You're elated all the time. I guess I probably not all the time, but a lot of the time. So Elation Speech and Language Services and elationspeech.com. And I'm working on my social media. Instagram will be at Elation Speech and Facebook, Elation Speech and Language Services. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Elation
Great.
Speech and Language Services.
Great. Well, we'll link to all of those. Thank you so much for being here with me
Thank you,
today.
Karen. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all of the links where you can go to learn about all of the great resources that we mentioned in this episode, as well as where you can go to learn more about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that helps SLPs and other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. You can learn more about the program at drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. As always, thank you so much for listening. It helps me so much if you leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found this useful, please feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues. If you are interested in being a guest, if you would like to invite me to be a guest on your show, or if you have a suggestion for a guest, please send me an email at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.